Hola, bienvenida.
Hello, welcome everybody to this discussion with Siri Hustvedt. This is part of our 8th March agenda, started last week with readings by people participating in workshops, and we'll continue with the presentation of a book by Armonia Somers called The Naked Women. This is the first time we have Siri Hustvedt online, unfortunately. For those who come to see her for the first time, or for those who have already read her, she writes both fiction and non-fiction, and she's always working on the place of women in art, mental health, science, neuroscience in particular. She has received the Príncipe de Asturias Prize 2019 and the Navarro International Award on Thought and the Humanities 2014. She was appointed Doctor Honoris Causa in Oslo University. She contributes in psychiatric reviews and others. She will be interviewed by Julio Ortiz. She's an editor in Icaramusa. She is a researcher in relation to literary translation, criticism, and she's an enthusiastic reader of Siri's work. We will also have simultaneous interpretation live into Spanish by Inés Craval and sign language translation by Tatiana and Cecilia. For deaf people who are looking to this presentation, they will change every 20 minutes during the interview. You can hand us questions in the forum we have in the 2 YouTube channels, and Siri will answer some of these questions at the end of the interview. So thank you so much, Siri, Julia, and all of you on the other side for participating in this activity. So the floor is yours.
Hi, Siri.
Hello, Julia. How are you?
Hi, and it's a pleasure for me to be here talking to you this evening.
For me too.
Thank you. I will begin with a very easy one.
Okay.
You use a lot of autobiographical material in your fiction to make fiction. Why did you choose to use this material and not other material? For example, how do you decide to put aside that Ian and Isadora and that mystery novel? No matter if you had that novel or your character, I'm not interested in that in reality. I don't believe in reality, but some way you choose a path and not another path as a writer. Why do you decide to go to the autobiographical, not autobiographical, but based on autobiographical material fiction?
Well, so for the last novel, the novel that you're referring to, Memories of the Future, I become interested in the fashion in some places for autofiction, for people use their own stories. Now, this started a long time ago, really, in France, autofiction, where there's certain rules that you had to use yourself, your actual events in your life, and the character had your name, but you could use fictional devices to tell the story, things that most of us don't remember. In some other places, this is expanded. For example, for a long time in the United States, the genre of memoir, right? Somebody's telling their own story. And I make fun of that memoir in the novel by saying the truth, which is nobody remembers what they had for breakfast 30 years ago, right? Unless something dramatic happened. So I chose to use myself as a character, but actually the name of the character is never given, only the initials that happen to be my initials. So
Yeah,
I'm playing
and
with
Sherlock Holmes. You play
Right.
with the Sherlock Holmes thing.
exactly. So I'm playing with the genre of memoir or autofiction in the book. That's part of the exploration of time and memory that's important to it.
Yeah, but even when the main character is not as aged, you can always see an iris there, an iris vegan.
Right. That's
and-
I turned myself around.
Yeah, like you can discover Siri's use of autobiographical material. You talk about genre. You know that in Spanish we have only one word to
Yes.
género. There is genre and gender the same time. And as you were saying, you play a lot with genre. It's something like flexible for you in fiction, but still you release like fiction books and non-fiction books, like really identified, like separated, like in the commercial editorial world.
Right.
Can you? I would like to talk about the need of these labels. Can you visualize a future when this genre, this género, male, female, as also male, female, cis, trans, and the literary genre will not longer be needed?
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, in English, there is a distinction between genre and gender. And English, interestingly enough, unlike many languages, doesn't have gender distinctions for nouns, right? For example, I mean, I grew up speaking both Norwegian and English, and in Norwegian, you have to learn the gender of the word.
So in Spanish, it's the same.
Exactly, and in Spanish, and that's why there's certain. I remember with my novel, The Blazing World, where there's an introduction by someone who's an editor, and the name of the editor is I.V. Hess. And in English, I never tell the sex or the gender of the editor.
Let me guess.
No, I never knew. It's just
right.
it's an academic.
No. Let me guess that everybody supposed it was a man.
I think that's usually the default assumption, right? But it was very hard in the translations for people to do a non-gendered editor because the language demands that the gender be known. So that was an interesting little issue that came up in the book. Yeah.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Tell me, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, ideas of fluidity are very appealing to me. I mean, in almost every aspect.
Okay, and I was going to say that here we are still having the discussion of gender in linguistics, in language. It's a very, very vivid, like everyday discussion. How do we talk, and what decision are we making while talking? Right. And it's very hard for us to change that. Not only literary genres, but I don't know if your life or your literature took into science. We know that you went into science and became a part of the scientific discussion, I would say, some years ago. I would like to know, what do you think there is in science that is not in literature? Do you think there is a truth, some truth that you can grasp with the scientific discourse and is not accessible to literature?
No. In other words, I am not a believer in truth with a capital T, right? I am someone who is interested in multiple perspectives on the same problem, right? So I grew up reading a lot of literature, a lot of history. I was actually a history major in college, Then I got a PhD in English literature. Are you a literature professor?
Yes, I know. I don't have a PhD. I had only the degree in literature.
Right. So, and anyway, but I was always interested in other fields. And at a certain moment, for example, when I was in college, I got interested in mystical states, especially female mystics, and how some interpretations of those mystical states involve neurology, right? Especially epilepsy and migraine. As a person who had migraines, that was sort of interesting to me because I've had auras before migraines. So I was reading about that then. And later, when I was writing my dissertation on Charles Dickens, a writer I do love, I got interested in aphasia, the language problems that neurological patients have. So I did quite a bit of research on that. And then later, when brain research was booming, I got interested in the mind-body problem that I had read about in philosophy and how this related to the science of the mind, so to speak. So my intellectual position, if you will, is that if you examine the same problem from many different points of view, you will not get the same answer. You will not get a definitive answer, but you will get a focused zone of ambiguity, which really interests me, right? That you're occupying plural positions. I'm a pluralist. Science was something that I felt that I wanted to know about. And, the longer I've been in it, I have to say that when you really understand something, you are able to critique it, right? You can't critique something you don't understand. You can do it from afar, but it doesn't have the same power.
Okay, you are. I sure you're aware that in science there is also a lot of the tendencies, or I would like to talk about neurosexism. There is a tendency to find like pretended biological explanations to reinforce sexual stereotypes.
Yes.
And you have learned a lot about neuroscience, and I heard you in Guadalajara 2019, the opening conference. You said that in embryology, they have discovered that the uterus is not that passive as we used to think, and the spermatozoa, it was not that agile, that chariot of fire tail that the man did was not that. Please tell us more about that, and this another tale on woman's passivity that has fallen. There are other tales still around, and science is supporting that false believing.
So this is really interesting. It is probably impossible to keep ideology out of science. It keeps coming in. All discourses are, I think, culturally filtered. What's fascinating is, in the history of science, you see how it happens. It is, of course, not always because scientists are, evil people who are trying to get their political views through. It's that they apply cultural categories, say of action and passivity, to what really. I mean, we think of a sperm as masculine, but it's not a full subject, right? I mean, it's not a whole body subject, and nor is the ovum. But there's a wonderful essay written by Emily Martin called "The Sperm and the Egg," and I think it's I don't have the title perfect, but basically she says, a kind of fairy tale romance created in embryology and reproduction that echoes masculine and feminine stereotypes. And that has lasted really beyond the science, right? You can still find it. But for example, a simple example, and then I'll go to the uterus. The most recent findings are that the sperm is actually, if not passively transported, it is almost passively transported by the vaginal contractions that lift lift the damn thing up, right? And then this is still a very interesting part of embryology. So, you know, what you have is you have the fused zygote, that very first thing, which is of two persons. And then it takes its journey. And many of these fertilized ovums are not, they never get implanted, right? Something goes wrong. Yeah. But what they know now, and the specific biological, what they call biological mechanisms, I have a problem with the word mechanism too, but I'm going to use it because it's just what they use, is that before the blastula, now there are multiple cells in this little ball, implants itself in the uterine lining. Biologists say there's crosstalk. Now, exactly what that cellular crosstalk is, they don't know. But one embryologist compared it to an interview. Is that the uterine lining basically interviews the blastula to see if, you know, it's okay. And then if it's okay, it basically asks it in. And so the uterine lining is not some like dead inanimate object here that is just invaded by the blastula. There's all of this crosstalk, or they also use the word dialogue, which is very interesting. And the more one discovers about embryology and gestation is how it is a kind of choreographed dance between. It's a drama of the between. And then what happens, which is so fascinating, right? You have the placenta and the embryo begin to form. The placenta is made from both maternal and fetal tissues, right? So it's out of both. And even as a philosophical object, right? Okay, as a philosophical object, the placenta is very interesting.
Yes, I read, you have written about this.
Yeah, a little bit. I'm kind of keep working on it. But so it's interesting as a metaphorical, but it's also interesting as a scientific object in gestation.
There are a lot of metaphors in science, aren't there?
Yes.
And
I don't think science can actually proceed without metaphors, but they should be chosen carefully.
Then you receive honoris causa on literature, on poetry. I learned also from your books that the famous male urinal long attributes to Marcel Duchamp, the Dadaist artist of the avant-garde, was not made by him. It was a piece of work by the Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Lorenhofen.
Exactly.
And
this is still a big debate, by the way. I'll tell you, they're hanging on very tightly. I am convinced that the evidence is pretty overwhelming that she is indeed the author of the urinal. But, you know, the powers that be are very, very reluctant to give up Duchamp as the father of this art object.
I comment this with men, and the first reaction was disbelief, not knowing anything. and the second
really...
and the second reaction, the Baroness, the who is the who.
Exactly. I mean, it's in a way a wonderful story, not just because there's overwhelming evidence, and I think that, you know, that a lot more than the best guess is that she made it, but it is, of course, a story of how innovative female artists get written out of history.
Well, you made a long path of restitution of authorship, women's authorship in art and also in science. It's not the only case. You quote Margaret Cavendish a lot, and the Princess Elizabeth of Bohemia, defying Descartes. I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
And I've learned. Is this feminist activism? I mean, I know it's obviously it is, but it took you an extra research work to find the woman's voice, to bring it to the conversation, not to like stop with the mainstream discourses we know that belong to men.
I think that's right. So actually, when I was sort of starting to have worries about some of the models or the standard model in neuroscience, it sent me back to the 17th century to philosophers that I had read before, like Descartes, Hobbes, all these, you know, famous discussions about the mind-body problem. But while I was reading and rereading and then reading secondary material, you know, telling me about what they, you know, Hobbes or Descartes or Gassendi or some of these well-known figures, what their positions were on various philosophical problems, I ran into Margaret Cavendish. And Cavendish, I only knew actually because Virginia Woolf kind of throws her aside, if you remember, and compares her to a gigantic cabbage strangling the roses in the garden. It's not a very nice comparison. I happen to be a great fan of Virginia Woolf, but anyway, so I kind of had forgotten about her. And then I started reading her, and it became very clear that she had a completely original position on the mind-body problem that was unlike any of the other natural philosophers of the period. And I got very involved in it. Not only was she original, I felt that she was very deeply onto something that is now being talked about in the philosophy of biology, which are questions like, what is agency, right? And I mean, what is this? How do we feel that we are agents that, you know, stand up, walk around and do things in the world? And how is that different from those cells that I just talked about having crosstalk or dialogue, right? In Margaret Cavendish's cosmology in her universe, every part of nature has some animation in it, right? Something alive in it. So she's a panpsychist. She believes that some form of life is everywhere. Now, she doesn't believe that stones have the same kind of life as human beings, right?
It's not the same.
No, but she also quite remarkably thinks that human beings have been completely wrong. I mean, she scolds man, but she means humankind. But of course, men were in the positions of authority for thinking that they're superior to plants and animals and insects and stones and the whole works. So her cosmology is one that really eliminates hierarchy. the deeper you go into it, I think the more profound she is, and the more valuable she is to our day, right? She's a real ecologist.
Yeah, ecology is one of of your worries now. Let me elaborate. When you were a student and there was no female team in Minnesota, in your school in Minnesota, and you wrote a letter to protest against this, and the letter said, please have a female basketball team, and the letter was considered ridiculous.
Yes.
And you said about this that what today is ridiculous, tomorrow will be obvious.
Yeah.
I would like you to think what is ridiculous now and will be obvious tomorrow.
Well, I think, let's see, there are quite a few things, I think. There's a double side to this. One is sometimes things seem to change very, very quickly. So, for example, I think the current really brutal discrimination against trans people that we're seeing all over the place, I have a feeling that could fade away pretty quickly. So, for example, in the United States, people are quite amazed by how quickly gay marriage was instituted here. That when I was growing up, homosexuality or, was kind of a secret thing, not talked about. There were moral imperatives. That really changed in my lifetime. Yeah. I suspect that tolerance for gender fluidity for people who for trans people will get better. I think it will seem like, what? I hope, but I think that's entirely possible. Other ideas have a tendency to stick, and why some ideas stick so much more deeply than others, I'm not sure. But one thing for sure is, for example, the mind-body division. The idea of, that the mind is a kind of masculine intellectual culture, that whole strain,
yeah.
And that the body is, feminine and nature. That division sticks. It's very hard to get out of that.
Yes, I've heard women defending that theory.
Yeah. I mean, this is not limited to what we think of as, a male person or a female person or, man or woman. These are ideas that shape culture in profound ways. And it's very hard for many people to think outside of those categories.
Yeah. I heard you have a new book coming, Mother, Fathers, and Others.
Yeah.
And it's already sold into 4 languages.
Oh.
Even
I haven't been keeping track, but that's good.
According to your agent's page,
okay.
Maybe the websites, maybe it's a strategy, but according to his website, it's sold into 4 languages. And I know you really care about rhythm and music in your writing,
mm-hmm.
and also we know for your first novel that you are interested in translation, also in the role that translation can have in literature. Where do you think your music goes in translation? What are the movements that translation makes to your work?
Yeah, I mean, of course, most of the time I don't know, because I don't have access to those other languages. So, you trust your translator. There are some translators that I have contact with and know, who either ask me questions or do talk to me about rhythm, for example, which I think is really important, not just in prose works, but really all artworks are, some rhythmic feeling, because rhythm is part of the meaning of a work. right?
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that there are, you know, better and worse translations out there. I mean, overall, not every book by any means, but overall, my work has been in over 30 languages.
But sorry, I thought maybe I didn't make it right, but
Okay.
not your translations into other languages, but translation in general, like you think is possible, is
to translate. Actually, this is funny because in the book that you mentioned, Mothers, Fathers, and Others, there's a little essay on translation.
Great.
Yeah, which is something. Yeah, which is something I've done. And the most recent thing I translated, I don't do it so much anymore, was a Norwegian poet who I really admire. And so I write a little bit about the difficulties of translating from one language to another, but also how much I would be deprived of if there wasn't translation. Right. And then there's the debate in translation studies about whether to bring the text to the reader or to keep the foreign aspects of it, right? So it's like foreignization or domestication. And it's a very interesting argument. I have a feeling that while you're translating, you probably do a little bit of both.
Of both, of keeping
making it, sound good in English, but not distorting it or trying to pretend that it's originally an English text, right? So I think those are the polar, the poles of how to think about translation.
Here to Uruguay, your books have a double translation because we get them with the Peninsular Spanish publishing house, the other one and the new one, but we have to make another effort if we want to read it in translation. For example, Elegía para un Americano, The Sorrows of an American, The Sorrows of an American was translated into Elegía para un Americano, that would be elegy for an American. And it really struck me like elegy, but elegy is a word that is in English. Why do we choose elegy if sorrows?
That's right. There was a lot of, because in one of the reasons I used sorrows was that I wanted to echo Goethe, who's translated, Der junge Werther, right? That it is translated into English as The Sorrows of Young Werther. I mean, this, of course, crazy romantic book that Goethe ended up denying, but I like the rhythm of that. And of course, it really is more about sorrows than about an elegy. Yeah.
Okay,
and who's the American? There are multiple Americans, right? In the book.
And what is American? Because for us, American is not the United States people only. If that's an American you use, we don't use to.
No, but it's not in the book either. It's not meant to be just Americans, right? It's because there's also a young woman from Jamaica.
Yeah.
In the book.
But the photographer
she's also part of the Americas. So the sorrows are reverberating among the different characters. It wasn't just the father, and it wasn't just the son. It was also this larger context. But yeah.
You have any? You are in the discussion for titles, for example, because. In covers, I would like to ask you also, because the same way that a word can completely change the approach to a word, because for me it's very difficult to go to the sorrows or to the elegy. It's like a completely different approach to the characters, everything. And the cover is the first approach, even before or at the same time with the title.
Mm-hmm.
And And have you seen covers in Spanish? You have like the pictures.
Probably have, but you don't have it there. I have seen some of the covers in Spain, but
I can Google and share.
Okay.
But no, I won't. but for example, in Memories of the Future, your last novel, you can tell us about how you have to dress the character for the United States edition. You have to put some clothes on.
She was a naked girl, and I was in the meeting. This was so strange to me. I had drawn this little picture for my cover. They had asked me to do it, and because they had seen the pictures inside, so I drew this flying naked girl, and I showed it to everyone. I thought it was going to be, great, and nobody said anything. And they didn't really say, "Oh, you can't." And I kept saying it. I said, "Well, what is the problem?" And it wasn't until I left the meeting and my agent looked at me and she said, "It's the pubic hair." I said, "What? The pubic hair? There's a few little curls." They couldn't have pubic hair on the cover. Now, in other countries, they did have pubic hair on the cover.
Yes, we can.
Yes. But I thought, this is the United States, where there's a kind of prurience, a kind of sexualizing of everything. I mean, this little flying girl was not intended to be a sexual object at all.
But that happened in the United States in children books. You cannot, you have to dress children. Absolutely. I know that colleagues that try to sell rights to the United States and they have to dress the children in the books in order to enter the market, the United States market.
Listen, when my mother who's was Norwegian, my father was a graduate student and they were in Wisconsin, and there was a beach, and a lake in this town. And my mother came to the beach with her 2-year-old and her 3.5-year-old, or was leave 1.5. She was just a baby and I was 3. And she took off our clothes and let us run, in the water and play. And she created a sensation. And she couldn't understand what was going on. They wanted the babies to have, something on, that it was scandalous. Now, I think that's changed a bit in the United States, but still no pubic hair on a cover.
Not only in book, but if you take a look on Memories of the Future, Memorias del Futuro, creo que I think it is in Spanish, there is a young woman that I found very related to publicity, to the advertising world. Like, it has for me nothing to do, and I apologize with the editor.
Well, I think it is an artist. I think the cover is an artist. I kind of like the freedom of that image. I mean, the story of the book is a movement from, it is a comedy too. It's a movement from feeling boxed up. There are 4 little drawings in there, and it begins with this screaming woman inside a box, and at the end she flies free. So I didn't really mind that cover. I have, however, I don't often object to covers, but I have had covers for books that I've just said, pink covers with flowers on them. Books where you have a male narrator and they insist on putting, a woman that has nothing to do with your story on the cover. This happens a lot to, female authors, because I don't know why. They want to signal the sex of the author on the cover.
Yes, I think they are excluding a lot of of readers from some of your books because of that course. But you yourself are an artist, not only because of your writing, that is, you are an artist, not only a writer, but also there are drawings in your last book. Have you explored any further in drawing or in visual art?
Well, I often think, listen, I love, I grew up drawing, and really it's drawings. I haven't painted anything for years, and I don't think I was ever any good at it, but I love drawing and making little, doodles and sometimes drawing actual things. So I still draw. I draw, mostly for myself. Every once in a while, those two books, they seem to call for visual punctuation. I wanted it to be part of the text. So I worked on those drawings. And, actually, sometimes I think in my old days, what if I become senile? Maybe I can still draw. If my thinking isn't so good, maybe my hand will still be useful.
I was going to ask you something similar. You said that books are a way out of pain, or something like that. Like we will read our way out of everything, like a way of salvation. Do you think there is another way? What will you say to 3-year-old Siri that decided to be a writer if writing was not a possibility? Is there another way out of pain, bad books?
Oh yeah, listen, I think there are many great things to do in the world. And I do, actually it came rather, I think I've always wanted to, since I was 13, wanted to write and started writing. And it did have a necessary function in my life. There's no question about that. When I was a volunteer writing teacher for psychiatric patients, I began to really, think about the fact that for many of those people, writing did seem to have a therapeutic function. It did seem to help. Now, there is some evidence for this, some empirical evidence. There's a person named Pennebaker who's been working on this for decades. And he found that anybody, this is not, you don't have to be a psychiatric patient or a professional writer, but anybody, if you write for 20 minutes a day, but it has to be emotionally driven. You can't just like write down a recipe, right? That
like the free writing of futuristic.
Yes, you kind of free, writing where it's emotionally significant to you. It seems to improve your mood, your liver function, and your immune function. The science is pretty good on this. So there's something about writing. Now, what is not terribly good, I think, in this work is why. Like, right, what is the theoretical understanding of this? They're not very good at that. It's kind of impoverished theories about why this might be the case. But one of the things that I've thought is that when you write, let's just stick with autobiography for a second, but this works in fiction too. You put your eye on the page. You write, I am suffering from whatever. Once you put on the page, it becomes what I call an alien familiar.
Mm-hmm.
It's your eye, but there it is on the page. It's distant too. And it's kind of fixed there on the page. And I think for the patients, but for all of us, there's something wonderful about that distance that is nevertheless related to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Cambridge, they talk as in literature, no? The strange and familiar at the same time, maybe, but about you.
Oh,
And
yeah. But that thing of putting the I or the character or the other on the page, and it's an act that you are doing, but at the same time, you're alienating it from the inner self.
you talk about neurological conditions that you learn more also working in the hospital. Have you heard that one of the sequels of the coronavirus is parosmia? There is a crossing smells, a cross in smell sense that you smell ghost smells is a consequence of coronavirus, and also memory losses.
Yes.
I heard. And I think this may be related with synesthesia that is pretty well described in your book, in your books. Can you think of these conditions of neurological disorder they cause, so-called disorders, as a strength? Would you have been a different writer without synesthesia?
Yes, for example. Yes, I think so. You know, the way we codify illness is understandably as a bad thing. I mean, generally we think of it as bad. Nobody likes being sick, and certainly no one likes getting sick and knowing that they're going to die of that sickness. There are, however, many people in the world, including myself, who have migraine and have had various, problems. Those kinds of chronic illnesses can be strengths, and especially when you embrace them as part of your narrative, which in The Shaking Woman, I realized as I was writing it and as I went along and finally came to the end that was really the point, that you embrace rather than fight what you have. And for example, with synesthesia, it is, a sort of a form of extreme sensitivity to what you're seeing. It's a visual mirroring and with sensation. It's not at all clear that I would have become a writer without that, in part because it does create a need to withdraw from stimulation, right? Like, woo, the world gets very exciting at times. And that withdrawal into, inner thoughts, fantasies, which then come out again in writing, I'm sure I was influenced by that. Also by migraine, having auras before, these kind of almost magical feelings, feeling really, really wonderful, like ecstasy feelings, but also feeling like you're getting somehow lifted up, transcendent feelings. I wouldn't change that. And I think I realized even after my violent shaking episodes, not so many times, I wouldn't change that either.
And you're very good talking about this, because many people discover very late in life they have synesthesia in teenagers. As a teenager, it's like something like nobody talks about, and it's hard for the person who has it to discover if there is no.
Well, because I think what happens is that you think everybody has it.
That's great. I really like that. Because it happens with everything. You think everybody looks the world the way you look it. It's like,
I remember, and I've had these headaches since I was a child. And I remember when I was 8, a good friend of mine, we were talking, and she said something. She said, "I've never had a headache." I was so shocked. I thought everybody had headaches quite a lot.
Yeah.
and it was just, I was amazed. And that was a moment of, well, of understanding that we really have differences among us. You know, there are people who never have headaches.
You think you have said you read a lot, many hours a day. Can you tell us what sorts of things you read?
I read lots of things. I do actually. I've been reading just today. I've been reading some feminist scholarship about the French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who I'm very interested in. And there's a kind of debate about what he means by what he calls the anonymous body. So I was reading 3 papers about that.
Do you read any contemporary fiction writers?
I do, and when I'm asked to say who I'm reading, I can actually tell you. I do now, because our house is so full of books. I sometimes get things on a Kindle, so it doesn't take up room in the bookshelf, which is always a little sad. But let's see. Okay. Oh, we've got a lot of books here.
No, that just to name some writers you like.
Yes, well, I have to say that I really like Milkman. It did win the Booker Prize, but I thought this Anna Burns novel, it's very, very smart, very moving. There was a book that was published quite a while ago. Oh God, what is it called? It's written in the plural we. It's about women coming to the United States to be married, Asian women. The name will come to me. I've been recently reading some books by Annie Ernaux, the French writer. Wonderful, wonderful writer that I haven't read before. I'm a fan.
She was in Guadalajara at the same time with you, like next room.
Oh, really? That's great. That's great. And you know, I return to things. I actually, in this book of essays, there's an essay on Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, which is a book that I continue to return to, which I think is just, you know, absolutely brilliant. And I also read Emily Dickinson with a ferocious regularity.
And is there a book that you reread, and in the rereading you don't find that great?
Yeah, you know, it has happened. It happens less now. I read Juna Barnes Nightwood, which is a very wonderful book that I loved so much when I was in my early 20s. And the next time I read it, must have been 15 years later. And I thought, gosh, I'm probably not gonna, you know, maybe it's like, not, I loved it again. I've now read it, I think, 4 times. And I really think it's fantastic. So yes, I do read fiction too. You know, when I'm writing fiction, which I'm not doing now, if the voice is too strong, I have to avoid it. I can't have it right there. I remember for example, I really like Henry James. He's a writer that I've always loved and returned to. And I was reading James while I was writing a novel once, and I started to detect these Jamesian infiltrations.
Yeah.
I had to get rid of him.
Maybe don't you think these infiltrations happens anyway, like later when you forget? you read, and then in the next book, like some infiltration happens. It's all a big infiltration, isn't it?
I think so. And I think actually that's when it's okay, right?
Sure.
Because that's when the book is so integrated into your system, if you will, and becomes part of your unconscious, that it comes out again. I mean, no one can write if, you know, she or he doesn't read. Reading is part of the drama of being a writer. And you know, again, as a pluralist, the more you read, the more voices you have in you, I think the better.
A lot of voices from the past are in your book. I think this is the last question. They are doing all kind of signs.
They're waiting. Okay.
The family memories are present, the past generations. But you, in interviews like this, you talk a lot about your daughter Sophie, and how she make you have a new perspective on some old issues. Is there room for her, for the following generations, in your fiction work?
Well, actually, I've been quizzing her lately on certain aspects of, I guess, what you'd call the life of the young. I mean, she's in her early 30s, and we've been talking about certain things, you know, how social media works, what has changed for her and people her age, and for people even younger. I have a niece who's still in her 20s, and another niece in her early 20s. So I do actually ask them questions. And the novel that I'm, you know, dreaming up, I need to do some research and talk to young people to help me write that book. So yes, I am interested. And I can say, for example, in The Blazing World, I had a character named Sweet Autumn, who was a New Age person. And I knew very little about this. So I did a lot of research to, you know, make it work.
It worked. Siri, thank you a lot.
Thank you for having me. I'm really...
Thank you. It was a wonderful opportunity. But we have to open, we would like to open a question from the audience. So maybe if there are any question, I don't know, I am going to translate to her the question. Let's all talk and close the event. Thank you again. It was really nice to meet you.
Thank you very much.
I would really like to see you in a in-presence book fair in the near future.
In person, yes.
Sol.
Bien, bueno, qué hermosa conversación.
Well, what a lovely conversation. It would have been nice to continue listening to you during long hours, but I'm going to tell you some questions from the audience we have received through YouTube and Instagram. She's silent. I'm sorry, I can't hear her. She must have turned off her microphone. Can you hear me? Can you not hear me, the translation? Can you not hear the translation? No se escucha nada. Hello, can you hear the translation? Hello? Can you hear me now?
Try again.
Can you hear me now, Siri?
Yes,
This is a
yes.
translation. Okay.
Okay.
She'll repeat the question. The first question, it is very similar to the next one. Antonio asked, when you wrote your first novel, Sorrows for an American, you wrote from the male point of view. In an interview, you said that you really enjoy writing as a man because a male voice has an authority that women's voice doesn't have. How much have you changed since then?
Well,
Because
actually,
now you use a female voice a bit more.
right. Well, actually, I've written 2 novels as men, and my first novel was written as a woman, and so I think that it's true that when you're writing as a man, you get to occupy this much more central position in the culture, which has a kind of pleasure to it. But marginal positions are also very interesting. And so my 3rd novel was actually by a man, and my 4th novel was written by a man, so to speak. But my 3rd novel, What I Loved, the narrator is a man. He's also a Jew, and his Judaism gives him a marginal position in the culture as well. So I've been exploring different voices. The Blazing World had 19 different narrators who are both men and women, and there's a person of color. So I had a lot of mix of voices, which is something I like to do.
Bien, muchas gracias.
Thank you. Next question. Dani from Instagram asks, what books are you currently reading?
Right, so here, I'm going to look up my things. I have been reading, I just finished a book. Can you hear me? I just finished a book by Lee, about a biography of the painter Lee Krasner. I think she's a wonderful painter. I just went to see a show that is up in New York now. It was the first art show I've seen since the pandemic. And I read her fascinating biography. She was married to Jackson Pollock, the action painter of the period. And I actually like her work better than Pollock's. And so I wanted to find out, and I just finished that biography today.
Bien, habrá que buscarla.
Well, we'll look for it then. Another question we received is, what is your position regarding abolitionism, regarding prostitution, pornography, womb use?
Surrogacy?
Yes, surrogate wombs. Yeah.
Well, you know, I'm not a person who is interested in penalizing sex work. I think there are all kinds of different ways to view this. Surrogacy is something I have not made up my mind about. I actually was asked this question by someone who's been studying it, and I said, you know, I don't know. I really have to do more reading and more thinking to know what I feel. As for pornography, I suppose I come down somewhere in the middle. I mean, I do think that obviously violent pornography, or pornography that you know, is really, you know, brutal and horrible. This, you know, cannot be a salutary or healthy thing in the culture. And whether, you know, banning all of this material is going to work. I mean, I think this comes from very deep places in the culture itself, and it comes out of misogyny. And probably misogyny is what we have to combat.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Bien. Por acá
Good.
preguntan,
Another question.
viene con un pequeño uruguayismo a la pregunta.
And this comes with a Uruguayan
Autores americanos.
manner of saying things. When I was speaking of American authors,
Sabemos lo que leen del francés.
we know more or less what they read in French and in German. And what about Spanish authors? Even if this is in a Spanish translation, have you heard of Armonía Somers?
I've actually heard of her, but not read. It's translated into English?
Sorry that I'm talking with. Yes, she has been translated by the feminist press in 2018, I think. The feminist press translated
Well, good.
In New York.
Well, good. So now I will read her. Thank you for the recommendation.
Bien, y vamos por la...
Good. Last question then.
Acá,
This is by somebody who says, I think it would be interesting to connect the experience of synesthesia with the pluralism of thought you mentioned at first.
You know what? I've never thought of that, and I think that is an extremely interesting thing to say. You know, it hit me like one of those light bulbs, which is there is a part of the synesthetic experience, of course, is that you are participating in the other body in a way that in most people is more suppressed. And so it opens the door to occupying multiple positions, and certainly at least two positions at once. I think you are absolutely right, and I should give you credit if I ever elaborate on this idea. Thank you. That was very interesting.
Bien, comparto algunas preguntas más que llegaron.
Well, there are some new questions, if you allow me.
Maybe one more, and then I'm going to eat dinner.
Bien, entonces un minuto que voy a elegir.
Just bear with me because I'm going to choose a question.
I know.
Me gustaría
I would like to ask Siri, in one of her essays, she says that art is born in the world in between, that is related to rhythms and music of the first years of life. Could you further elaborate on this?
Yeah, I mean, this is an idea that I've been thinking about and working on for some time, which is that I think art is always social. It's always a gift for another, often an imaginary other, but that the object itself, whatever that is, a book, a piece of music, a sculpture, is realized in that between space. That's where it happens. And that the early versions of this are the social space that opens up after we're born, right? The social space between first caretaker and infant, and that the music of those exchanges, I think, are very important to human development, but they're also part of what becomes art for people who decide to do it, and creativity in general. G.W. Winnicott, a psychoanalyst and pediatrician that I've long admired, talks about potential space, that space between, and I find that a very powerful idea. He locates play and culture in that space between. So I keep thinking about between spaces as powerful places to continue to explore.
Muchísimas gracias, Siri.
Thank you so much, Siri.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you all of you, for your participation and help and goodness.
Realmente nos quedamos como con muchas preguntas.
Well, we have many questions left, but that happens always. We also wanted to tell you that we had a discussion with Julia about the invisibilization of women in art and the places has in your literature, and we wanted to ask you if you have heard about Petrona Viera, a Uruguayan artist.
No, I have not.
There was a major retrospective exhibition recently, and it's nice that you haven't heard about her, because we're going to send this to you.
Oh, that's
It's the
kind.
catalog of the retrospective exhibition we had in the Fine Arts Museum here in Uruguay. And we thought it would be nice to tell you a story about her. She received the local fine arts salon prize for a work that she called Portraits in the Garden, but the jury, in a very paternalistic manner, said the title was wrong and put composition, because they said what she had done wasn't a portrait in their view. And not only that, it was a shared prize, and she had a very dignified position, and she returned the prize. So, well, for those in the world of art, this echoes with our own experience. So we're going to send you this book so you can hear about her and see her.
Thank you so
and
much.
add her to your list.
I'm really looking forward to seeing it. And I will now look up the story that I'm sure I can find. So that's fascinating. Thank you again. Thank you for the present. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Siri. Nice to meet you. Nice to
It will
talk to
be
you.
nice to meet you, Julia. Nice to meet all of you. Thanks for your help, And take care of yourselves and be safe until you get your vaccines. Be safe. Okay. Take care, guys.
Muchas gracias.
Bye-bye.
Y por último, para cerrar, les
Thank you. And last, to close, we thank Siri, Julia, Tatiana, and Cecilia for participating in this discussion, and we invite you to participate in our next discussion. We'll have a panel presenting the recent work by Harmonia Somers, The Naked Women, and we're going to have Daniela Borrelli and Carolina Ocampo, who is the illustrator, and Maria Jose Oliveira, the art critic, will comment on it on the 23rd March, 19 hours. Hope to see you again. Thank you all for being connected.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.